Hi everyone, in today's video we're going to look at how you can introduce energy gels into your training and running. Now most of you watching this probably would have used energy gels at some point in the past, whether it be for half marathons, even 10 milers, 10Ks potentially depending on the time you're taking, also how you choose to fuel, but particularly we're looking at this obviously in the marathon context. Now when we go through a marathon we're going to be taking on a lot of fuel. Now whether we do that as a mixture of gels, we do some chews, blocks, drinks, whatever you choose to, there's a good chance you're going to use some gels at some stage. So we need to make sure the stomach is okay with them and check that through practicing essentially in our training. Now, if you haven't used gels or if you're using a new gel, what I'd often say is actually just almost do a taste test. Take it at home so you know it's not going to upset your stomach. And if it does, it doesn't matter because you've got some available facilities, if you put it that way. So that's what I tend to do. If I'm going to be taking something new, I will try it at home, or the next best option is try it on a very, very short run where you're going to be staying relatively close to home. Something like a 4 or 5 mile easy run where you can just nip back, or your friends, you can nip to your friends instead. Sounds a bit strange, but you'll be surprised what people do. So the key thing with this is really just to give yourself that flexibility. So don't try and take it first run on a big long run. Definitely don't do it in a race, as you know. Hopefully you should know by now. But definitely kind of get some practice in with these. Now, the same kind of applies if you're going to go through the transition process into a new type of gel. So years ago, I used to use the SIS gels, which are the standard ones you find in supermarkets and kind of most people take. However, I then made the transition over to chalk gels back in 2019, and I went through this kind of iterative change process where I started alternating. So that's what I would generally recommend you do. I started with 2 SIS gels, followed by 1 talk gel at the end of my run, so that if it did upset my stomach, again, I was going to have less of an issue. Gradually, that became 1 SIS, 1 talk, and then 1 ASA, and I started alternating. That was a much better process. That worked really well, and I was getting more of the talk gels into me, giving me more fuel, which I've talked about in another video. Gradually, I was doing 1 SIS, 2 talk, 1 SAS, 2 talk, again, building up in time through the training process and long runs. Eventually, I was able to go into 3 talk gels, but this did take a few months to get used to. I did make the mistake, in all honesty, of trying all the talk gels, and this isn't about those particular gels, it's just that my stomach wasn't used to this amount of fueling. I did do it in a race, and I suffered the consequences. I felt really ill for a few hours afterwards, partly exertional, it was the middle of the night, but it was also because I made too much of a change too quick. Nothing wrong with the products themselves, but I wasn't ready for them because I hadn't trained with them in that way. I was just trying to go, oh, it's race day. Bit naive 5 years ago as I'm recording this was when I did that. I learned that lesson the hard way, put it that way. So same thing again goes into your other run. So make sure you do not transition too quickly as you go through these things. Start with a short, easy run, then maybe into more of like an effort session, something you're going to run, 7, 8, 9 miles, something like that, with some pacing, and then bring it into your long runs. Again, I would probably start bringing them in a bit later, especially if you're making a change of gel. Do it towards the end of your run, so if it does cause a problem, it's not too much of a problem. It hasn't ruined your long run. You may end up cutting it a mile or two short, but that's not the end of the world, relatively speaking. And if that allows you to go, actually, you know what, this isn't a good idea, that's absolutely fine. That said, now there is a real tempting thing if you do have an upset stomach with a particular gel that you go, oh, can't use those, bin them all, sell them all, whatever you want to do. But it's worth persevering and giving yourself a try because it's often a case that people are taking them too late, which is actually really what causes the problem. Equally, they might have been on a Saturday morning or Sunday morning, having been out the night before, could have been some food, upset stomach from food or from drink. There's other things that can come into this. So don't assume that necessarily any given product is the problem. It may be how we've used it. If you aren't taking this at the right appropriate times, then that's worth having a look at as well. Other thing you want to do, probably take it on easier miles to start off with. Now, long term, we absolutely need to be taking gels at marathon pace. And actually, one of my pet peeves of people is that they will always slow down to take their gels, or they'll stop and walk and pause their watch. Oh, I'm taking the gel on, so I'm going to stop and walk. Unless you're going to do it on marathon day on race day, don't do that. You need to get used to taking them at pace, but you can absolutely start taking them at slightly easier paces. Even if you just deliberately slow down for half a mile and then over time get to run at marathon pace and take them on board, that is needed, obviously. Now, the same thing applies if you're going to be doing some caffeine gels. Now, this is a thing, again, a lot of people tend to want to try and they're a little bit nervous about how it might upset their stomach, and it absolutely can be a problem for some people. Caffeine is well known for causing bowel movements and for being a diuretic, which means we want to pee. So it's worth having a use of this, but later on in your runs initially to start with. Again, the same process, basically. Start with them later in your runs and start bringing them forward and then in and in and in and in. Now, once you've gone through that transition of the gel types, you want to move on to a more productive gel type. Maybe we've added some caffeine. We also need to start looking at how we can bring in the frequency of our gels. Most people are taking far too little fuel when it comes to marathon training and racing in particular, and I'll do a separate video on this as well. However, you need to probably start bringing your gel timing. We can absorb 80 to 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour as a glucose fructose ratio of 2 to 1. So we want to make sure we are trying to get something close to that. Most people I speak to taking on 40, maybe 60 grams per hour absolute most during a race, and then they wonder why they bonk. Now this is really, really common, and I say that not as a as a jab to any individual person, because it's kind of a, if we don't know what we're doing, we just go with what's worked, and don't necessarily explore that. And equally, companies will tell you, "Oh, our product is the best one. You need one of these." So we kind of can get a little bit either blasé about just following the guidance, or kind of go a little bit like, "Well, I don't need that much. They're just saying to take that much because it sells them more products." There may be some truth in that. Who knows? But the science does back up the 80 to 90 grams per hour, so it's worth aiming to build towards that as much as your stomach will tolerate. So yes, there's this scientifically proven range of ideal. However, if your stomach will only handle the lower end of this, or even slightly less than that in the meantime, work to that level and then try and increase it if you can. Key thing though is to not take any risks. Our run is a priority. So basically, we need to make sure that we're building in gels really sensibly, really gradually, increasing the frequency, making changes to the types of gels potentially, and potentially adding caffeine gels in as well. But don't make any sudden changes. Do it really slowly. Ideally, early doors in your marathon training, or better, even before marathon training, experimenting in some of your easier, longer runs in your speed work block, or just outside of marathon training with whatever you were doing before that, essentially. So those are the key tips to try some new gels, or to make gels something new you add into your training. Lots of little things you can do, but they can have a huge benefit. So give them a go. Don't just get stuck in the "this is what I've always done" attitude. Experiment and play around.